Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's your host Terry with his co-pilot Brittany and with my sidekick Beatrice as always. Brittany's not always here, but Beatrice mostly is. So we just picked up a load in Moultrie, Georgia, taking that up to New York State, and then it'll be time for home time. But so I've been thinking a lot about different things here in Georgia. Georgia's, kind of an interesting state. Of course, Atlanta's the capital and largest city. But so I went by an exit today, and then on the exact same exit is a sign for two different national historical sites. The first one is for Andersonville. And in particular the remains of the Andersonville POW camp. And if you're unfamiliar with this, it was a prisoner of war camp, one of the largest run by the Confederacy to house Union prisoners during the Civil War. And it became famous because about a third of all the Union prisoners that went to the Andersonville prison, which was actually called Camp Sumter, and it's named, I think, after Sumter County, which is where Andersonville is. It became famous because the commandant of the camp, who was only a captain in the Confederate Army, was tried for war crimes, and after the war by the Union, or well, at that point the United States government, and a military commission, and he was executed for war crimes. And he was one of only two Confederates to be executed for war crimes. And there's evidence that he was and by the way, his name was Henry Wirtz, and he was actually born in Switzerland. He was a Swiss American. He had immigrated to this country and joined the Confederate Army at some point after he had been here for a number of years. But Wirtz was constantly trying to get the Confederate government to give him more supplies, more food. The Union prisoners were not even housed. They were basically just like in this open pen. There were no barracks. Barracks that were supposed to be built weren't. And so Wirtz kind of got held accountable for all of that, even though, like I said, he was a captain. And there's been this kind of history where people said Wirtz was a scapegoat, etc. And, I will say, having been in the military, pinning stuff on somebody that's a captain, an Army captain is pretty, it's kind of interesting because that's a fairly low-ranking officer. However, the interesting thing about this military tribunal was that it kind of set the stage, or maybe not the stage, but the precedent that committing acts that are unconscionable, that are just crimes against humanity or war crimes, even if somebody is of a low rank, they are not going to be able to avoid accountability simply because they were acting under orders. And that was kind of, that was the premise of the Nuremberg trials after World War II. And of course, the United States, basically ran the Nuremberg trials, and Robert Jackson, who would later be a Supreme Court justice, was the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg. But the guy who prosecuted Wirtz was the same prosecutor who was prosecuted the case of Lincoln's assassination conspirators. So anyway, that's just kind of an interesting side note. The other thing that I found like odd or an interesting coincidence is that Wirtz was Swiss. And oftentimes we think of the Swiss as being neutral and like downed American airmen during World War II could escape to Switzerland and stuff. But I've read some books about the 8th Air Force and about the air war over Europe during World War II, and I can tell you that getting to Switzerland was not like the start of a party, because our flyers, and this is kind of an aside to this whole notion about the Civil War stuff, but our flyers were imprisoned in Switzerland. They weren't turned over to anybody most of the time, and they were imprisoned, and a lot of them were treated horribly. The Swiss, especially when there were mistakes made during the war where U.S. Air Forces bombed places by accident that were near this German-Swiss border, and the Swiss were not kind to American flyers. In fact, they treated Russians who got to Switzerland after being shot down or avoiding capture. They treated the Russians much better than they treated the Americans. It's just kind of, and I was surprised to learn that when I studied the 8th Air Force. But anyway, the other sign that was at that exit here in Georgia off I-75 was for the President Jimmy Carter historical site. And I don't care what your politics are, I don't think there's ever been a man to occupy the Oval Office that's as humble and decent a guy as President Carter. And President Carter and his wife Rosalind. They are just, they truly live their belief in God and in their religion, and just an incredible couple. I mean, obviously President Carter is very, he's quite old. I think he's like 98 now, and he is just the best of America. And again, I don't care what your political persuasion is, but when you look at a man who served his country in many aspects, served his state, and served his fellow man, I think you'd be hard pressed to name anybody that is better than President Carter, better than Jimmy Carter. And just a little aside to that, President Carter is the only person to have ever graduated from the Naval Academy that was president. We've had a couple of guys that went to West Point, at least 2 that I can think of, but there may be more that have been president. But Jimmy Carter is the only Naval Academy graduate to become president of the United States, and that was after he was governor of Georgia. So anyway, I was, as I'm wont to do, reading the ads for truck drivers and all the jobs out there, and I kind of feel like there's this not to steal CRST's slogan, but there's kind of this gold rush going on. And if you know anything about gold rushes, a lot of it's based on speculation, based on rumor, and just hysteria in some ways. So there are a lot of carriers out there that are advertising high pay for drivers, and if you read through and kind of drill down, you're like, the pay doesn't match what they're saying. Like I read one that said your potential average annualized salary could be $93,000 plus. Well, if you look at all of those words, potential means may or may not come to pass. average, well, that's got to be based on math, right? And then, they said 93,000 plus. Well, an average is not, a plus or minus. Like, it's a knowable number. And then what was the other? Potential average. Oh, annualized. So what that means is they're going to pay right now a rate that if you drove, let's say, and who knows what their metric is, but let's say, we'll just say 120,000 miles over a course of a year, that their pay would equal average potential $93,000 plus. And so, it's important to keep that in mind, right? Because annualized, if you say, oh, this guy earned $2,000 this week, okay? Well, that's a great week. And if you annualize that, that's $104,000 a year. Well, let's say that the reason you got paid $2,000 was because you got a $1,000 bonus that week, but you don't get a $1,000 bonus every week. That's the thing that's going on right now, and I feel like there are a lot of drivers that are going to chase the bait. They're going to chase the numbers without drilling down on them. And there are a lot of companies that are trying to cash in, and part of how they're trying to cash in is get as many people in seats as possible and drive as much as possible, because they know that the rates cannot be sustained where they are and that it's gonna level out. And I would rather have a job where I have a progression up the salary table instead of taking some high paying job that's not sustainable. And it's part of it's just psychological, right? Like, you don't want to do the same job for less money at the same company, right? Like, no one wants to take a pay cut. And so the concern here is, this is kind of my cautionary tale, is if a company is not a big company and they're just offering you the moon, and they rely on brokers, or they have, they're just not that big, they don't have that much power in the market, they don't have the ability to handle huge amounts of volume, then invariably it's going to come, I don't want to say crashing down to earth, but it's going to slowly drift back towards earth, like a paper airplane. Maybe not a rock, but a paper airplane. And they're going to have drivers that are making substantially less than when they started. And it's the gold rush effect, right? It's like everybody wants to cash in while things are really good. Now, if you're like, hey, what do I have to lose by cashing in? If you can all of a sudden add a potential for $20,000 more this year than you made last, maybe the answer is, yeah, you go for it, but you gotta be disciplined. And what I mean by that is, if you know that your potential average annualized salary could be $93,000 and you made, let's say, $68,000 last year, do the smart thing and pretend like you really didn't get a huge pay increase, and just kind of sock that money away. Be smart about it. Pay off bills. Get your credit in order if it's not. If you already have everything paid off, put it in a savings account and just wait and see, right? Because my bet is it's not going to be sustained, right? Companies come and go. And I feel like a lot of times people get out of trucking because even though they like it, all of a sudden the bottom falls out and they're not prepared for it, especially in the owner-operator segment. So I just share that with you, and part of it is I had a great week last week, and I'll get to numbers in a little bit. I did say I was going to do some, but we're trying to actually sort through everything and understand everything. I know the top line, I know the bottom line, but I want to understand more about what we're doing. And we're having a good week this week. We got visibility to, a good amount of revenue for the truck, but I'm keeping that in mind too, because in the situation we're in now, there's a lot of ebb and flow. There's a lot of ebb and flow. Taking 5 days, 6 days off. So anyway, I just share that with you. If you're looking to job hop, it's a great time to do it. Although I don't know that it's not a great time all the time in the trucking industry. But know that if you're going for the gold rush, make sure you put some gold aside for when we find out that the gold mine is mostly just fool's gold. So anyway, be safe out there. We will catch you at some point tomorrow. We're going to be heading north, try to beat the traffic through Atlanta tomorrow morning, and so we'll be getting on the road early, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.